religion today in Nigeria has become the talk of town on a whole lot of front. There are different ways of coming to look at this particular phenomenon that has been with us here for a very long time, and the concerns are many. The concerns are there. The concerns have been left for us to look at, but they are taking new forms. They are taking new shapes. They are taking new directions. They are having different ways of coming to interplay with our life. And for we a people who have not been so critical of the assumptions and the cultures and the belief we have come to garner and gather from years of living and transferring them orally, we've come down to this particular place. Some persons lay claim to the fact that the continent is the way it is at the moment. A thing I think is too large to get to generalize, especially when you're talking about Africa. There's persons hold that because of the fact that Islam and Christianity came into the continent, so a whole lot of things went south, and the way things are at the moment is as a result of the people losing touch with who they are. That's one supposition. Another group get to hold that the advent of the so-called white man and all that happened here, as we now have it as colonialism, also contributed to the distorting of a people's progress. That's another supposition. And then there's the other group that believe in the fact that we have to go back to the African traditional religion to really come to understand how things ordinarily should flow for us. And the question I get to ask in this particular place is, what is the African traditional religion? Is it a single entity of belief used across the lands and the villages of different African tribes and countrymen and women? Or is it a lettering and a proliferation of different ways of coming to look at this? Is the Yoruba man going to worship as the Igbo man? Is the Ijaw man going to worship as the Kalabari man? Is the Ogoja man going to worship as the Ogoni man? Is the man from Ghana, the Ashanti region, going to worship as somebody who gets to speak the Bantu language? Like, what really would be the baseline for we coming to tell ourselves that there's a thing like the African traditional religion? I don't think there is an African traditional religion. I think there are ways of belief and there are ways of religious expressions expressed by different people in different locations before the whole idea of what we now come to have as African. The same way we struggle with the idea of having a language that cuts across the African continent, so also we are here asking ourselves today, what way forward? If we lay claim that the concept of the white man or the concept of our colonizers is a thing that we ordinarily should not accept, considering also how they gave it to us and to a large extent how it was presented to us. Be that as it may, what is the way forward? As the likes of Ngugu Ationgo, the likes of Chinua Achebe and different persons have come to argue on the scale of the use of the English language, and letting Achebe to get to tell us that let no man be deceived that we make use of the English language. What we are going to do with the English language are terrible things unheard of. Because until the hunted writes his story, the hunter continues to dictate history. And in as much as we also now have come and told ourselves that we don't like the story told about us, it's time for us to tell our story, but we have to do that within reason. We have to look at the things, what we are advocating for ordinarily benefits. We also have to look at the downsides of it. And the downsides are many, as you can find in a whole lot of religion. The downsides of every religious sect or every religious system that have come down are many, and only those who have come down to sit down critically and had serious conversations as to the philosophies and the ways of getting to do things and the reasons and the logicality of the way things ordinarily should go. These are the religions that have come to seem to it that over time it's It's a thing that has come down to make sense to a whole lot of persons. There have also been literature, be there Sanskrit, be there inscriptions on stones or whatever. But there have been things handed over down. Even the Sanskrits have not been saved from the confusion that gets to come with coming to terms with the fact that every translation remains a betrayal to the original intention or the idea of those who ordinarily put this stuff down there. In another conversation, we'll look at the claims made by a couple of Africans as to the fact that the Bible was written to enslave the African, as though the Bible emanated from that particular region of the world. There are also assumptions that a whole lot of stories written down in the Bible are stories that were stolen from for example, the Igbo people, and they were used and they were changed on different fronts and on different layers until they became what we now have as the Bible. We will look at that. But today, for the crux of our conversation down here, we are looking at the downsides of religion, when religion falls into the wrong hands, when religion meets a people poor, when religion meets a people hungry, when religion meets a people starving, when religion meets a people dying. What does it do? And when religion is blended with ignorance, what happens? What happens to a people when indeed they cannot really look at themselves squarely and tell themselves, you know what, this particular place we are going is wrong. This particular place we are going, we are making the assertions of Karl Marx plausible when he said religion indeed is the opium of the people, of the masses, as you might want to have it. And so in Nigeria today, you get to see a whole lot of cropping. There's this emergence of new ways of getting to look at the gospel, getting to look at the Christian message. Nothing sometimes is even known about Islam because the language of interrogation and the language of conversation and the language of worship is Arabic, and it remains obscure to the greater majority. Not to say that what goes down there is completely without question, or what goes down there to make up the body that has become that religion is completely flawless, because there aren't any religion as we have them today that have not had their good and their bad times. Some have not even had what you might ordinarily come to call categorically good. But be that as it may, when we look at Nigeria today, we cannot isolate the fact that a thing like the poverty in the land has come to see to it that a whole lot of persons have despaired, a whole lot of persons have fallen to God, not necessarily because they need God, but because they need bread. Not necessarily because they want to worship God, but because they think in their coming to terms with the reality of a God who is in heaven, a provider, a God who can save them from their economic situations and distress and problems. They are fine with that if the God ordinarily does his bid. And so you get to see a transactional kind of gospel being preached over the years. It leads me down to the whole idea of what you give to God for him to give you what you want. When we're growing up, we sang this song, give to God what you have, for he has given you, he will give you again, for he is the Lord. Give to God what you have, for he has given you, he will give you again, for he is the Lord. And I ask myself, why give to God what he has given you? Because he's going to give you again. It's a question many persons are asking. It's a question theologians have tried to answer. From the sales of indulgence to the sales of different things and spiritual artifacts and articles in the church, from the sales of holy relics many years ago up until our whole ideas of getting to do bazaar in a place like the Catholic Church in Nigeria, and the whole idea of Thanksgiving in the Catholic Church and in a whole lot of other places. And around this period, from about June, July, August, September, around October, November, you get to see bazaars taking shape and taking forms. And one begins to ask himself, what really is the message being passed? What are the people being told? Is it to give out of the abundance of their generosity, or to give out of fear, or out of the need to be given back? Many persons and many priests and many churches and many church leaders and many people have used a whole lot of, I want to call it tricks, to get to see to it that people get to give. If you are telling people, give because God has given you an end there, it's a plausible thing because you are showing a sense of generosity. But when you now make it to look as though a necessity, you must give for God to bless you. You must give for God to bless you. I don't know what that is, but a whole lot of person find fault with that particular way of thinking. And I also, as a person, get to find fault with that way of doing stuff. As such, our theologians and our philosophers and our priests ought to do better. They can do better. They just need to look for better ways of getting to pass this similar message. If you're doing fundraising and it's clearly stated as fundraising for the good of the group you get to belong, it's a different thing. But when you attach the whole idea of, the first 50 people who come out are going to receive a blessing from God, the first person, 10 persons with 100,000 should march to the altar, and then God get to pray, the priest gets to pray for them, and then they receive their blessing. It calls into question the levels at which we are transacting the gospel we now have in our life and in our time. When you begin to tell people that, the more you give, the more you receive, the more you give to God, the more chances you get to have of Him getting to bless you. One begins to ask himself, is that really the case? Is that how God operates? Is that how God functions? Is that what ordinarily we've come to see down in scriptures? For the sake of our conversation, we leave these things loosely and we leave them hanging here, because these are things we ought to be asking ourselves. These are things we ordinarily don't ask ourselves, and these are things a whole lot of persons get to go down in depression. A whole lot of persons have been exploited as it concerns the wrong use of religion, especially when it falls into the category of ignorance and when it falls into the hands of people who get to suspend reason and just to use superstition and sentiments and things. Sometimes we cannot at least draw at least not necessarily in deductions, but at least some levels of induction as to these things logically make sense, because most of the time they don't make sense. Most of the times the things you get to hear MCs who champion bazaars get to make don't really make sense. Most of the times what you get to hear priests say on the pulpit as it concerns what ordinarily should be the gospel doesn't really make sense. I don't even want to talk about the whole idea of tithing. That's a thing we can also look at, but starting from the very beginning, will not grant you economic success. You want to get economic success, you need to show what you are selling, and another person needs to be buying what you are selling. You cannot just sit down there and you are praying your life day in, day out, and you are asking God to get to transform your life. It doesn't work like that. If it used to work in the past, maybe I wasn't there, good and fine, but the world we currently live in, the dispensation we live in, whereby products are the things that get to drive the success and longevity of a people and the way they get to enjoy and get to get the goods of the world. It will be a serious problem if we tell ourselves this particular story we are beginning to tell ourselves, the story that, God grants. I don't know. If you know how He does it, please let me know. And you get to see, during bazaar period, you get to see not just even the periods of bazaar and Thanksgivings and all that. It runs sometimes throughout the cycle, being insensitive a whole lot to the plight of the economic situation of the country, being insensitive to the plight of the people we get to extort from. And sometimes it might just be that maybe because priests and clergymen and religious leaders have not come to really understand what it means to be a Nigerian in Nigeria today, a Nigerian abroad today, an African in Africa today, and an African in the world today. And maybe these priests and these religious are beginning to forget the fact that you know what, it took the church a whole lot to get to where it has gotten to. And there are lots of mistakes emanating in recent times that are not strange to the church, that are not strange to these ways of thinking, with particular emphasis now to the Catholic Church, because to be Protestant, as far as I'm concerned, is to be ignorant of history, as Cardinal Newman will get to say. But be that as it may, it also holds that to be Protestant is also to be part of history, because there was a point in time in the history of the church that there were lots of issues and there were lots of problems, and the Catholic Church till tomorrow cannot be exonerated from that particular way of getting to look at the history of the church and the history of the world in the last 2,000 years plus, because the church contributed greatly to the problems that led to the breakage by Martin Luther. He was not the first person attempting a breakage. The schism had already happened long before Luther came, because there were discrepancies and arguments as it concerns doctrine and all that. And recently I saw Father Kelvin posting about the sale of indulgence as the fact that the early Christian church never paid tithe. And one begins to ask himself, from whence came the whole proliferation of how to do things within the church, how to get donations from people and how to get them to donate to the building of God's temple and all that. From whence did such doctrine come from? It's a thing we ordinarily have to answer. And the church in Nigeria, despite the level of progress it has seen in the last 70 years or more in terms of church attendance, has also had its own problem. And theologians and philosophers of Catholic origin are writing, but they are writing sparingly. They have not really taken up serious tasks, and it's a thing I want to see going forward. Beyond writing on Facebook and sometimes trying to bully people, I want to see our churchmen, our religious leaders come out clearly to state the things they ordinarily want us to believe them say. Because the same things they argue and complain about the government not being clear enough, being obscure in their ways of doing things and their dealings, so also we find in the church there's a whole lot of obscurity concerns the way things ordinarily get to go. There's a whole lot of lacuna between the people and their clergymen and their religious institutions. There's a problem, and this has to be fixed. And if we don't look at it, we would have a problem. And if we don't look at these things, we would come to a point in our life and in our history where sometimes we might just end up hating ourselves, because it matters how we get to look at things. It matters how we get to operate. As such, the clamor for a whole lot of things down the religious line and the asking for God for things we ourselves should do is as a result of our levels of irresponsibility and our levels of leadership and the way we've come to accept the image of ourselves. It goes a long way to tell how we have been left behind in the global scale of prosperity and in the global scale of how to do things. And if you look at those who ordinarily get to benefit from giving, it's not really the giver, especially in a place like Nigeria. It's almost always those being given. Pastor Jerry, Pastor Adeboye, Pastor David Ibiyomi, Pastor Chrissy Oyakulomi, Pastor Johnson Suleiman, Apostle Johnson Suleiman. The list goes on. We can continue mentioning the different institutions from Deeper Life to the Catholic Church to a whole lot of things. And sometimes you ask yourself, where is the line? Where do you draw the line? Where's the dichotomy? How do you distinguish between this? This also is not going without saying that the church has been a refuge for a whole lot of persons. Take, for instance, the case of the Nigerian musical artist Rema.
When I was 8 years old, when I lost my dad, we felt very lost, we felt very abandoned. All that we had was taken from us, and we felt very alone. And I remember at the time, Pastor Joy and Pastor Tom was the pastor of this church, and they opened a shop for my mom. And that was what she managed to take care of us, feed us, and manage. And just to add to that, if there's any widow in church today, I'm pledging 20 million to any widow in the church. It's multiple widows. I hope the money will be spread among the widows in the house.
Him giving back to the church is also one of those ways the church gets to take care of the people around. I'm not against giving. I'm not against donation. I'm not against ways of making fundraising and making wealth available for the church to get to see to it that it functions in the humanitarian perspective. I'm against the idea that religion is the thing that is going to answer our economic problems. I'm against the idea that the church is to become a humanitarian institution and that alone. Because by the time the church finishes feeding the body, it loses its importance because any other body can do this particular stuff. When religion only focuses on granting people what they need now and here, as opposed to why it came, asking of questions and the void it comes to get to answer, we begin to ask ourselves, how wrong have we gone? How long have we been on this wrong train? Because you like it or not, religion is first and foremost down there, or attempts to answer the question of the void that relates to meaningfulness in life, that relates to the meaning crisis in our life. And as we evolve over epochs and generations, we get to meet new forms of meaning crisis. We get to meet new challenges as a people. And if we are not humble enough to tell ourselves that we don't have all the answers, we most likely will crash. And we will crash very badly. We will crash terribly so too, because we have shifted the whole idea of why religion was there in the first place. So you see priests taking over the jobs of psychologists, you see priests taking over the jobs of physiotherapists, you see pastors taking the jobs of healers, you see pastors taking the jobs of doctors and nurses, and you see church leaders also wanting to oversee the affairs of constructions and how communities are planned and how lives ordinarily should be led as opposed to being ordinarily they were supposed to be. And so we ask ourselves, how far? We must be asking ourselves this question. So if we must go forward as a people, if we must prosper as a people, we have become so irresponsible, and we don't even know we have become so irresponsible. Directly or indirectly, our leaders have made us handicapped. That's why we keep on going to the places we ordinarily don't need to go. You don't need to ascribe to God what he has given you the power to do. St. Augustine of Hippo said, God who created us without us cannot save us without us. God who created us without us cannot save us without us. What does it mean? Simply put, he was talking particularly about grace and walking hand in hand with that as it concerns salvation and different ideas that came up, one of them being predestination and all that. But if you look at this from a literal standpoint, God who created us without us cannot save us without us. What was he saying? What is he saying? What is he trying to do? He's saying something very simple. He's saying something we have refused to listen for a very long time. And that is the fact that we as a people must come together to see to it that we make our lives better, that we make our existence down here a thing worth living. And one of the ways is to first know our problem. And that is what I believe we've not really come to tell ourselves the truth about. The idea that where we are and who we are and what we try to do must all come together as in synergy to give us meaning in life, and we haven't really done that. People are still having meaning crisis. People are still having problems in their life. And it makes me begin to ask, to what level of understanding have we come to get from our different religious beliefs? I've paid some time to the Catholic faith and by extension the Christian body that get to encompass Protestants, Anglican, Protestants, evangelicals, and the Pentecostals, and the new crop of prosperity gospelers we get to have around. But then on a broader scale, as an African, why are you in the religion you are at the moment? Is it for utilitarian purposes? Is it for self-help? Is it to better your life? I, as a person, see as a defeat, or as a way ordinarily we shouldn't look at this from the very beginning of the whole issue. Because if you look at life and you look at the way things have become, and you look at how things are, and you look at how we are going, and you look at how we are progressing, and then we look at how we are not progressing, one can comfortably get to tell us that we have not really been doing the things we are doing out of real love for what we ordinarily want to do. We've always tied one thing or the other as it concerns benefiting us. And so in a thing like the philosophy of altruism, people begin to ask the question, are people really altruistic? Are people really out there who want to just do things for the sake of doing things for others without actually looking at the possible benefit that can come from them? And many persons get to answer yes, but another question comes up. To what level can somebody be altruistic without actually fulfilling himself in the process of him being altruistic? Because when you claim someone is altruistic, when you claim somebody is out there for the good of the next person and the next person alone, and that gives him satisfaction and fulfillment, if he doesn't do it, do you think he will gain satisfaction? He won't gain satisfaction. And so certain persons begin to say, or some school of thought get to say, since this person gets satisfaction from doing good, and if he doesn't do these acts of kindness and generosity for the next person, he himself doesn't get the necessary satisfaction he needs, is it then bad to say that such a person isn't altruistic after all, since the person is trying to look at his own interest in one way as well as the interest of the next person? That also can be a possibility. But in a world where good can be done for the good of another person, how is that not a thing to be emulated? How is that not a thing to be looked at, as opposed to utilitarianism, as opposed to exploitation, as opposed to the pretentious ways we get to do things and we get to stay and get to live our life? So this is a question many persons ask. This is a question we also should look at, because even with the whole championing of going back to our roots, to what end are we doing that, and to what are we falling back to? I will continue to ask this question, and I would like to engage people who want to have meaningful conversation as it concerns how this can be done. As a people, how is that going to be achievable, whereby we see ourselves in the 21st century with the level of globalization and the way the West has come and how far they have come in terms of pitching their tent in our world and in our times today, whereby you cannot survive without English. Not even the Chinese believes that their language is what ordinarily they need to use for business on a global scale. They speak English. Not even people from Spain or the Spanish community. They fall back to English predominantly because of the level of literature that has come to be produced out of that crop of people and the intentionality that have been brought to the fore. But I'm not saying attempts should not be made, but what are we really attempting at for, and what is the literature we are falling back to? To what levels can we have criticism being asked? To what levels can we make logical assertions to the things we want people to get to believe? If these things can come out the same way a thing like Christianity predominantly did over the course of its 2,000 years of existence, why not? It's a plausible thing, and it's a thing that should be given agency and that should be given the necessary attempt it needs. But it should be done, and it should be done well and right. It shouldn't just be a thing people just want to do because they feel like doing. It's a thing that should be done with truth in mind, and not for utilitarian gain, and not for spite for the next man's religion or the religion that has come to be predominantly a thing we get to have. And in a free world, in a world where people are meant to have freedom of thought, thinking, rationality, and all the freedoms and all the leverages that comes with being a free born in our world today, we also have to understand that those who were born into a Christian home, an Islamic home, and have not come to the level where supposedly those championing this return to Babylon, return to our ways of our ancestors, they should come to understand that not everybody have the same level of reality they have come to achieve or they have stumbled upon. Not everybody have the kind of consciousness they believe they have come to achieve. As such, we must come to understand that the literature we ordinarily, or the body of the system we are trying to tell people to fall back to, is not a system that ordinarily would grant access to different ways of looking at things without actually single-handedly picking one's own way of doing things out. It's a whole lot. And we have to look at it squarely. And back to the idea of our levels of responsibility and our levels of thinking and our levels and ways of getting to do things. It is high time we begin to ask the right question. And we need to begin to ask the right question, and we need to begin to ask the right ways of functioning where we find ourselves today, so that somebody like Jeremiah will not come to tell us a whole lot of things he get to tell us. And when you watch these videos, you see the caricature they make of a sacred way of living and being that has been passed down for thousands of years. When you listen to Pastor David, you ask yourself, what the heck is he trying to say? You look at the stuff he get to put out there, and it is the boldness for me, it is the courage he has to pick up the microphone and get to say these things he get to say. You look at Pastor Adeboye.
I'm going to be apologizing for making a mistake. for saying that if you don't pay tithe, you might not make it to heaven. I'm sorry, that's wrong. That's not in the Bible.
Up until the point where he claimed to have apologized.
It is wrong to limit you to 10% at a time when some of you should be 20%, 30%, 40%.
And the different corrections and different postures he took.
10% should be for beginners. Giving should be violently.
You get to see in the videos that something is wrong. You don't need a talisman to tell you that. You don't need a logician. You don't need serious logical syllogisms to get to tell you that there's something apparently wrong with the ways we have come to hold and think as a people. When you listen to Suleiman, when you listen to Eneche, when you listen to these men and women who have come down today to be called men and women of God, you ask yourself, to what level of rationality do they get to apply this? And Catholics aren't exempted from this. I see a whole lot of Catholics parading themselves online as though they have a perfect religion going out there for them. The Catholicism practiced in Africa is not synonymous with what is practiced in Europe, or what falls, or what is the Catholicism in America. The Catholicism practiced in Nigeria, it's even at variance with the neighboring countries. It finds itself within the same continent. And so one begins to ask himself, what must be done? What has been done? How should we go? What should we do? How should we progress? How should we function? How should we look at things generally? What are the conversations we are having? Have we resigned ourselves the same way we've resigned ourselves within our political system? Have we resigned ourselves the same way we resign ourselves when our politicians get to play us magu-magu? Because indeed, we are people badly led from a physical standpoint to even a spiritual standpoint, from a metaphysical standpoint to a physically standpoint. Our ways of empirical testing and observations are flawed. Our judicial system is on its own. And so you find people praying and falling to the hands of God and God alone, because it's almost the last recourse for a whole lot of persons. So that in our time now into the future, a whole lot of persons have failed to come to realize the real value a thing like religion can offer to a people. It has a whole lot of things it can bring to a people. Even stating from the humanitarian standpoint, you have the Red Cross, you have Caritas, you have a whole lot of organizations associated with one religion or the other. You have schools championed by nuns and reverend sisters and reverend brothers and priests and religious institutions and a whole lot of things down there. You have shelter homes, you have hostels, you have accommodations, you have place for rehabilitation, you have a whole lot of things. You have a great chunk of literature that emanated from religion, and you cannot run away from it. The Chronicle of Narnia, the Lords of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, you name it. There's a whole lot of stuff down there that has come down to us from these bodies. You've had things like the Confession, you've had things like the 7-story mountain, you've had a whole lot of beautiful ways of doing things and coming to terms with how people function and get to live. But not to say also that there have not been wrongs done. And today we've been focusing on the wrongs and the ways we have not really functioned well as a people, the ways we've not really helped ourselves, and the ways we ordinarily can come to help ourselves. And so we tell ourselves we must question our assumptions. We must question the ways we get to do things, from the ways of our ancestors to the ways of the modern ways of belief and the emanation and the emergence of Christianity and Islam and the different forms of and crops of religious ways of demonstration and all that, because we are people searching for meaning. We are people searching for meaning. And some persons get to ask themselves, does it mean that we just came from God to go back to God, and in between here get confused and get lost in which bus or which train or which tram or which metro we are ordinarily supposed to stop? Is it the case that we came from God to go back to God, and then before that we have to suffer so much? These are questions a lot of persons are asking, and these are questions we must try to answer. These are questions we must look at. These are questions most of the times we have not looked at. And be that as it may, And though we might think we've come late, which is a thing we've already done, it doesn't take away from the fact that we are still on time and we can start now. The last time to do a good thing has passed. The next good time to start doing a good thing is now. What are we waiting for? We have to hold our religious leaders accountable because they get to tell us how we think, they get to tell us how we function, they get to tell us how we imagine things, they get to tell us how we do things. And so when you sit down and Pastor David Ibiyomi is telling you the things he's telling you, and Adeboye is telling you the type of things he tells you about tithing, and you go to a church like Odumeje's church, or you go to a Catholic church and the Reverend Father is trying to embezzle you when it comes to bazaar, when it comes to Thanksgiving, and when it comes to donation without actually giving you the chance to think for yourself or be for yourself, you should sit down and ask yourself, this church is our church, oh. And if they say it's not our church, you get out and you leave and you go somewhere else. It's your life. It's not a life you must live in relation to what you've been told. It's a life you have to figure out for yourself. It's a difficult life. It's a hard life. Don't buy the idea of a cheap, prosperous Christianity because you, as much as you've come to have it now, that's not the life you've had. You might be 5 years, you might be 10 years, you might be 20 years in a job, in a business, or in existence as a human being. You've come to see to it that it's not that easy. Life has never been easy, completely devoid of pain and suffering and sadness. And when they sell these things to you and you buy them in your gullibility, you make yourself a prey to them and they become your predator. When you tell yourself that, you know what, I think I am fine with the way things are being done in my church, you question not the assumptions of our pastors and judge them not. And I'm like, really? Men and women with sexual passions and desires and intensities on different scales, that as you and I, men and women who sleep, who cry, who eat, who go to toilet, who use the restroom, these are people you don't want to question their assumptions. Men and women who sit down in their closet and wallow in their vanities and in their fantasies behind closed doors, having a different image in the light and in the night, doing everything wrong just to belong. Men who flaunt their wealth before you in your poverty and with no shame still ask you to get to donate to the level you get to donate. You don't want to question them. You don't want to question these things. You just want to be exploited from all angles. The judiciary gets to exploit you. The military gets to exploit you. The security agencies get to exploit you. The road warders get to exploit you. The roads are not even there to be used. Town planners get to build poor houses for you, or they don't even plan the houses. The politicians is there doing his own exploit and telling you not to fall into anarchy and all of that, and then you are all comfortable and all good and all calm and all happy. And I'm like, wow, interesting, fantastic. I wish you well in your life, but know you this day that is not religion. That is not the way to go. You first get into religion because probably you were born into it, but in the long run of it, you try to find meaning not just in your life, in relation to the lives and times of other persons, because you live in a global society and the world is becoming more cosmopolitan than you can imagine. The world is becoming more advanced and more sophisticated than you can think of. The world is becoming a whole lot of things that never used to be in times past, a whole lot of things that we as a people never had. And so if you ask me which way, how best should we go, how well should we progress, how well and how fast should things be, I will tell you for free: take your time, run introspections, do things in retrospect, look at life front, back, side, and all the ways you ordinarily can explore. And if you don't know, ask questions. But most of the times when we don't know, we don't even know we don't know, and that's another level of consciousness that needs to be ignited on its own. But it starts and ends with the fact that God has given us a whole lot of things: talents, gifts, ways of looking at things, ways of doing things. But for whatsoever reason, we have not allowed ourselves the chance and the time and the opportunity to get to function in ways we ordinarily get to function. And so we continue to die slowly. We continue to die slowly, never really living lives, never really living our life here. And so when all is said and done, we come back to it that we must forge a way for ourselves, that we mustn't be a people sitting down in just one place waiting for salvation, waiting for aids, waiting for loans. Challenge your governors, challenge your senators, challenge your ministers, challenge your commissioners, challenge your local government chairman, challenge the ward councillors, challenge your religious leaders, challenge your pastors, challenge your imams, challenge your nurses, challenge your doctors, challenge your engineers, challenge your town planners, challenge everything that is worth challenging, challenge every system, bring all system under the knife and pass it through fire and get to see which get to stand the test of time. We must continue to inquire how to better our lives. To the question of poverty, we mustn't say, God grant us money. We must say, what can we do? What are the policies we can enact? What are the things we can put together and see to it that life becomes better and stress God less? To things about healings and our cravings for healing and all that, we should say, what are the hospitals we can bring about? What are the researches we've done? What are our chemists doing? What are our biologists doing? What are our lab scientists doing? What are the scientists doing in Nigeria to better the situation peculiar to us as a people? To a thing as malaria, we don't even have foundations we can beat ourselves on our chest and get to say these are indigenous bodies solely aimed at bettering this stuff, without pointing to one way or the other getting aids and getting support and getting initiative from across the Sahara, across the Atlantic, even across the Pacific Ocean, in terms of incentives sent as aids, in terms of grants sent here and there. And your brothers and sisters, they travel out of the country, they do exploit. Why can't they do that there? It's a whole lot of things that can be done in the same place. When you go to Tinapa and you see the gigantic structure that was put up there, it's a place in Calabar, it's a place in Nigeria, it's a place that can be transformed that well. When you look at Eco Hotel, it's a place that can be replicated. When you look at the presidential villa, when you look at the planning done in Abuja, it's a place that can be replicated across the country. When you look at these places, they are not so different as to the places you travel abroad for your vacations and all that. It's just a matter of mindset. What you see as an artist, what can you see? It starts with just a marble, and from it comes out a sculpture. It starts with just a stone, from it comes out an engraving. It starts with a wood, and from it comes out a lot of things. We have to think outside the box. We have to think outside the box. Until we do that, we labor in vain. Until we do that, we will continue to be where we are. I am Biringkpa bin Nemeka. If you do like this video, please share with your friends and family members, because it do matter what we get to think and how we get to think and what we get to discuss and how we get to converse with one and with all. See you next time.